Hey everyone, Jai Hind and good morning. Welcome to the platform of StudyIQ IAS in English, and I welcome you all in the daily Hindu analysis, and this analysis will be done by me. My name is Bhanwar. I welcome you all. Kundan, good morning. Who else is live? Please type in the message and let me know that you're watching this session live along with me. And again, once again, we'll be talking about the complete Hindu analysis, which all news are important in today's newspaper, and also we'll be seeing why they are important from the perspective of UPSC as well. So we'll be talking about this. Today's date is 10th of April, and we'll be seeing the Delhi edition while we'll be discussing with the Hindu. All right. So let's see who else is live right now with us. Please type in the message and let me know that you're watching this session live. Now, when it comes to today, it is a very important day. Why it is very important day? Because today is the 10th of April, and from today onwards, there will be negotiations that will be tabled at Pakistan, Islamabad. So ultimately, this is a very important day to see what all things will happen. Because when it comes to the ceasefire that was, that was between, good morning Ramu, the ceasefire that is right now between US and Iran. So ultimately today's date was finalized so that the negotiations can begin in Islamabad, and we will have to see what all things unfold over there. At the same time, when it comes to US and Iran, there are the news that the Trump have said that Iran should not impose, or it should not impose any kind of toll for passing of the ships. However, when it comes to the day 2 of the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, what happened was that all the traffic, it came to a standstill, because the merchants, the merchant vessels, they are seeing what kind of a complete proposal will be there for the transiting into the region. And also there are the news that Iran had mined the Strait of Hormuz. So Iran had asked that if you have to pass, just coordinate with the military of the Iran so that the passage could be safe. And ultimately the safety is a concern while passing through the Strait of Hormuz. Shirobi, hello and good morning. And this was an exit strategy, right? All right, so let's start off with today's discussion, and let's see what the Complete Hindu has for us in today's edition. That is 10th of April. Today is a Friday, and ultimately before moving ahead, we all discuss some of the quotes which are important. So ultimately yesterday there was polling that happened in 3 of the states, and these quotes, they relate to the themes that we will be discussing in today's session. The first quote says that the best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others, and this quote is by Mahatma Gandhi. Alright, the second quote is that you can use is that the success of a democracy is not measured by the absence of challenges, but by the resilience of its institutions and the participation of its citizens. Alright, and the third quote that you can use is good governance requires not just good laws, but good people to implement them with integrity, accountability, and empathy. So these are the 3 quotes that you can write down, and you can learn them so that your answer writing, it becomes more efficient. All right, so let's start off with the news, that the key themes that are discussed, or we are going to discuss in today's newspaper. The key themes are, the first news that we will be discussing is about the World Bank report. World Bank have revised the growth rate for India, and we'll be discussing it as the first news that will be there. Then the second one is about the electoral turnout, and as well as the election commission monitoring, and also about a piece of the article that we'll be discussing about Plutocracy. Then we'll be discussing about the Sabarimala as well as Article 25 and the religious freedom that we have under the Constitution of India. We'll be also discussing about Jan Vishwas Bill and the regulatory governance, although we have discussed about Jan Vishwas Bill in key details, and I have told you to watch the complete video that is there in the video section of the same channel. Alright, then we'll be discussing about the climate change and also its impact on the public health. Again, there is an article on the last page which is again very important, and we know when it comes to UPSC is more focused upon the climate change, environment. This theme or this topic, when it comes to environment, it has become very important for your UPSC perspective. Alright, then we'll be talking about Nari Shakti, women as the economic drivers. There is a complete piece of editorial in today's The Hindu, and we'll be also seeing the news related to the West Asia ceasefire and as well as the risk that is there in Hormuz. Then we'll be talking about Gaganyaan re-entry. There is a complete piece of article in today's The Hindu, and also we'll be talking about CAPF Act, which had been notified yesterday by the central government. So these are the key themes that we'll be moving forward with in today's session, and let's move to the first key news that is there. But before that, let me tell you that PDFs for yesterday and day before yesterday had already been uploaded into the Telegram channel, and if you want the PDF, the complete PDFs can be found at this channel. All right, you can scan the QR code, or you can search at the rate Bhanwar_StudyIQ, and thereby you can get all the PDFs that is, complete annotated PDFs you will get over on the Telegram channel. All right, now moving to the first news that I was discussing, it is about the World Bank, and over here the World Bank have said that the India's fiscal year 2027 growth outlook, it had been cut to 6.6% from 7.2. Ultimately, over here, the World Bank have cited that it is because of the impact of the war that is going on in West Asia, and that will have impact on household as well as on the government consumption as well, and as well on the industrial activity. So all these three will be impacted because of the war that is going on in the West Asia. At the same time, when it comes to the figures, so you can see over here that the World Bank have revised the figures, and it has reduced India's fiscal year 2027 growth rate from 7.2 to 6.6%. All right. At the same time, the World Bank has also revised the South Asia growth impact as well. It was earlier in 2025, it was 7%, and now it has been revised. The complete South Asia, this is for the South Asia, it has been revised to 6.3%. At the same time, when it comes to the Monetary Policy Committee, so MPC have, yesterday we have spoken about it, that India's inflation is about to be 4.6%, and this is the revised RBI MPC forecast that we are talking about. All right. Good morning, Anu. All right. Good morning, seen live from Tamil Nadu. Hi, Yuva. That's nice. Very nice that you are from Tamil Nadu. Although I have never been to Tamil Nadu, but I had been to Kerala. I have lived in Kerala in Kannur. All right. Or Kannanur, as it was earlier, known as. So I have lived in Kannanur. I have lived in Kannur, that is there in Kerala. All right. All right. So when it comes to the World Bank, it has reduced the growth forecast for Indian economy for the 2027. Right. Ultimately, it is linked to the downgrading. The downgrade. It has been linked to the West Asian conflict that is going on, and as well as the energy disruption, because we know that the India is dependent for the oil imports, and maximum of the oil import is from the West Asian West Asian countries. Thank you very much, Ramu. I'll be there very soon. All right. Ultimately, the report still noted that there are strong reform momentum and a private sector role that is there, and that will derive the Indian economy towards the growth. And the growth forecast also shapes the fiscal as well as monetary and even the investment expectations which are there in India. So ultimately, these growth forecasts are very important. And then they are also important for your UPSC prelims as well. You have to remember the key data figures, because UPSC sometimes asks these data figures in your examination. Now, this complete growth, it depends upon the consumption as well as capex and the exports, and even the macro stability in the global region. All right. Thank you very much. I'll be there in Tamil Nadu. Don't worry. All right. Now, when it comes to the conflict, the report says that if there would have been no conflict in the West Asian region. Okay, you are from Karnataka. That's nice, Mantun. And good morning, sir. All right, Mantun, you are from Karnataka. That's nice. So I have a complete plan to visit the southern states very soon. So I'll be visiting Tamil Nadu. I'll be visiting Karnataka very soon. All right. Coming back to the report. All right, the report that has been, published by the World Bank, it says that if there would have been no conflict in the West Asia, so in that condition, the GDP would have been 7.2%, and ultimately the industrial growth, it will slow down. As per the World Bank report, it will slow down to 7.5 in the fiscal year 2027 from 8.8%, and the higher cost of the input The higher input costs, they will hurt the both food as well as accommodation services as well. At the same time, this report also highlights that the Gulf remittances, which are 38% of the total of India's remittances, they are at risk from labor market disruption because of what is going on in the West Asian economy, as well as the geopolitical tension that is looming in the West Asian nations. All right. At the same time, the current account deficit and the rupee is already under pressure because of the US-Iran war that we are seeing in the region. Deepak Roy, thank you very much. And this reduction of GDP growth, how much will it get effect on our fiscal targets? See, Ramu, when it comes to the targets, these are the forecast. All right, these are the forecasts. Maybe what will happen if the situation changes, as we have already seen that when the ceasefire was announced, what happened was the market, it rejoiced. All right, ultimately the market, it jumped forward. So it all depends upon what will happen in the near future. All right, what will happen? That is why I said just before starting off today's session that this is very important day, because everybody will be keeping their eye on the Islamabad, that what will happen and how the negotiations they will move forward. Because when it comes to the Iran's 10-point, the 10-point principles that they have put forward, so they have this thing in the mind that they will go forward with the enrichment program, which the Trump administration, it does not want. So ultimately, we will have to keep a keen eye and the way the global geopolitical tensions will be, or how they will be managed. That is how we will see that how our fiscal targets will be, they will be affected or not. And we have nothing to visit like. Oh my God, Bihar has so many places to visit like. All right. And it is a very historic place. I must say, Deepak, that there are lots of historic places to visit in Bihar. There are lots of places that you can visit there. Hello and good morning, Tihir Khan. And समझ नहीं आ रहा, थोड़ा detail में बोलो. So Tihir Khan, this is basically English channel. All right, this is StudyIQ IS in English. And over here, I'll be using only English, and that is why probably you are not able to understand. All right. So that is the reason. Please remember that this is an English channel. For the Hindi, you can, or the bilingual channel, you can switch the channel. We have another channel for the bilingual as well. All right. Now, moving forward, when it comes to the GDP or the growth rate, it is impacted by the situations that are there in the globe. All right, there are different, you can see how the complete, the supply and the factors, supply factors, demand factors, they manage to have an impact on the inflation. You are in Jammu Kashmir. Okay, that's nice, Tehir Khan. All right, so now when it comes to the inflation, so over here you can see in 2020, all right, in 2019, in 2020, they were, when it comes to the inflation, it was basically by the supply factors that it was driven because of the excess of the rainfall. All right, at the same time, thank you, Deepak. All right, at the same time, when it comes to the demand side factors, you can see after the COVID-19, the inflation was because of the demand factors. And then again, when it comes to Russia-Ukraine conflict, that again led to the inflation because of the demand side push. So it is because of the supply and the demand that the complete economy is dependent. And we know about the demand supply curve. So when it comes to demand and supply, they both have an impact over the inflation that is there. Now, ultimately over here, what will happen is that if the situation remains the same, there will be shocks in the global market. And these shocks will ultimately result into the demand shocks. It will ultimately result into the supply shocks, and that will have a major macro impact over the Indian economy as well. All right. Now, when it comes to the likely impact or the effects of this, there would be higher import bill. All right. And when there will be higher import bill, what will happen is that there will be more of the current account deficit as well. Inflation risk is already there because of the cost push inflation. At the same time, there will be slower industrial activity as well, because most of the industries that depend upon the oil and the LNG imports, they will be impacted. And when they will be impacted, of course, the complete industrial scenario in India will be impacted severely. At the same time, although there are certain risks which are involved and we are already seeing them in the macroeconomic context, but again, it provides us with the opportunity as well, because at this point of time, we can use reforms. We can reform our energy sector, we can reform the logistics and the manufacturing so that we can offset the shock that India or the Indian economy will have because of the West Asian crisis that is right now. At the same time, there are certain concerns as well, because when the economy will get slowed down, that will have impact upon the youth employment, as well as it will have the impact upon the real incomes, because the real incomes, because of the cost push inflation, they could face pressure. So that is what we have to monitor when it comes to the Indian economy and the West Asian crisis that is going on right now. All right, at the same time, RBI has already, we have discussed that RBI have already kept the repo rate unchanged at 5.25%. All right, it has taken a neutral stance, and there is the repo rate that has been kept unchanged at 5.25%. At the same time, the petroleum minister, he is on the visit to Qatar to secure alternative gas supplies, and at the same time, it also connects with the Atmanirbhar Bharat and even with the various schemes like we have product linked incentive schemes and the logistic reforms, and ultimately we have to see how the India manages this macroeconomic shock if there will be any. And already when it comes to the Indian government, they are already trying to manage this complete macroeconomic shock in a positive manner. All right. All right. Now, when it comes to the impact of the geopolitical crisis, you can see over here, there had been historical context as well. In the history, we have seen that in the 1970s, there were oil shocks, and ultimately the chemical fertilizers adoption and even the reliance on the traditional fuel, it made us vulnerable in 1970s as well. There were oil shocks, there were inflation, high inflation, low growth, and that led to policy shift, not just in India, but these policy shift was globally. All right, this is the period where we have seen the Reaganomics, we have seen the Thatcherism. All right, at the same time, this is the current geopolitical vulnerability that we are seeing right now, that there is US, Iran and Israel conflict that is going on, and ultimately India, which is dependent for the energy. We are dependent for near about 80% of the oil imports. And when it comes to the LNG imports, we are dependent about 60% for the LNG imports as well. So India is heavily dependent upon the imported energy, and ultimately that will intensify the impact of the current crisis that we are seeing in the global context. At the same time, there will be certain macroeconomic impact, just like, for example, we have more than 70 million tons of the chemical fertilizers where we have dependent upon the import. At the same time, there are currently about 330 million active LPG connections that are there. We have about 60% of the textile production that is based upon the man-made fibers or the man-made or the chemical synthesis, and also there are polymer widespread in the Indian economy. Now all these will be amplified by the geopolitical tension, and it will have the direct impact upon the consumers. All right, because these sectors will be impacted, so it will impact the consumers, it will impact the manufacturers, even the farmers because of the fertilizers, and airlines as well because of the rising ATF or air turbine fuel. So ultimately it will have a impact over whole of the Indian economy. Now, when it comes to step forward to attain the energy independence, so there should be mainstreaming of the efficient resource use, and also we must recognize scarcity of the various resources that we have. At the same time, we should limit and remove the fertilizer subsidies, like for example, we have for the LPGs, and we should promote the ethanol blending in petrol as well, so that the oil import dependence, it must decrease. At the same time, we should incentivize the electrified flex fuel vehicles or the hybrid vehicles that are there, or the electric vehicles that are there. We must incentivize them so that there is more of these vehicles in the market. At the same time, there are alternate energy solutions as well. That is that we must move forward for the bioadditives in the fertilizers, and ultimately that will increase the nutrient uptake as well. we must also look forward for the dimethyl ether, that is a biomass derivative in comparison to the LPG. We must also move forward towards bio-CNG that could be produced from the organic waste, and ultimately we must move forward for the bio or the organic waste, and ultimately we should convert the organic waste into the CNG, bio-CNG, and also we must move forward for the potash extraction that could be done from the distillery spent wash. And ultimately this particular time period that we have right in front of us, this of course is a vulnerable time period for the Indian economy, but at the same time it also provides us with the alternative that we must move forward for the reforms in the Indian sector so that the import dependence, it should be curbed, and ultimately we should be self-sufficient when it comes to the energy market. So over here you can see that how the oil price have led to the inflation and the shocks in India. Alright, when it comes to the Iranian revolution, then there was Iran-Iraq war in 1980s, then there was first Gulf War, then second Gulf War, and then we had the demand that exceeded the supply. Ultimately, right now, there was a Russia and Ukraine invasion or the war as well. So you can see how the oil prices have surged because of the various impacts over on the oil price, or there were lots of geopolitical tension that have surged or that have led to increase in the oil prices in the global market. And ultimately, because India is oil import dependent, so India must move forward or tread carefully. All right. Now, over here we have the first of the question for today, and the question is World Bank assertion A. The World Bank revised India's fiscal year 2026-27 GDP growth forecast down to 6.6 from 7.2%. The primary cause cited was the impact of the West Asia conflict on energy supply chains and household consumption. So select the correct answer. What will be the right answer? Yes, 5.25 is the RBI repo rate that was declared yesterday. All right. So what will be the right answer here? So when it comes to the World Bank, over here the World Bank has revised. Yes, the first statement is true. The first statement is true. The second statement is true. And of course, the primary cause that was cited in the World Bank report is the West Asian conflict. So both are true. And R is the correct explanation of A. So the correct answer here will be A. Now coming to the next piece of the news that is there. It is about the election that was conducted in the Puducherry, Assam and Kerala. And over here, it has been said that the voter turnout had been quite significant. So Assam had recorded a voter turnout in the election, 85.91 turnout. And at the same time, Puducherry 89.87 and Kerala has reached a 78.27% of the total turnout when it comes to the voters who have casted their vote yesterday in the poll. At the same time, the counting is scheduled in the 3 states for the 4th of May, and also there were by-polls which were held for the 4 seats in these states. At the same time, it was the first time, please remember, why I have picked this news is that it is the first time that the Kerala have used AI-assisted video monitoring to flag the queues as well as the crowding at the polling booth stations. All right. Pranjal Sharma sir, क्यों नहीं ले रहे session Hindu newspaper? I don't have any idea about that. Yashu. All right. All right. So these are the very important things that you can note over here when it comes to the polls that were conducted in 2 of the states and 1 union territory. Now over here, one thing very important to note is that the higher turnout, it can indicate the competitive politics and strong local issues or the voter mobilizations as well. At the same time, when it comes to the higher voter turnout, the eventual mandate may be seen as more representative because more of the people, they have casted their vote. All right. At the same time, over here, the turnout alone, please remember that the turnout alone, it cannot tell us whether the voters have endorsed or rejected the incumbent. So we have to see up to the result of the election that what will happen in these states or the 2 states and the 1 union territory which have casted their vote. But at the same time, At the same time, yesterday we had election, and again, just related to the election, there is a very important piece of news that you will find in the Hindu, and that is how elections in India, they are becoming plutocratic. All right, now this is very important news because this news article or this complete article, it says that when it comes to the data, so nearly 93% of India's members of parliament are crorpatis, or they are millionaires. And that raises a very important question, that whether access to the political power, it is becoming more unequal. And what does this mean for the smaller parties and the independent candidates? This is kind of a conversation between M.R. Madhavan, who is co-founder and president of PRS Legislative Research, and R. Rangarajan, who is former IAS officer and author of courseware on Polity Simplified. So this is kind of a dialogue, and you can read this article, very important article, very good article about how India is becoming more of plutocratic. Now, when it comes to plutocratic, this complete article, I will tell you that it says that the elections in India, they demand massive spending, and we have seen that there is massive spending that is happening in all the elections, whether it is Lok Sabha, whether it is state legislative assemblies or Vidhan Sabha, or any kind of elections in India. Even in India, when it comes to the grassroots level democracy, that is the Panchayati Raj institutions, there we have seen that there is massive spending that happens in the case of elections. And ultimately, right now, this article says that nearly 93% of the current Indian members of parliament, they are millionaires. And when it comes to plutocracy, it is basically a government that is heavily influenced by the wealth. All right. Over here, it is very important to note that on 15th of February 2024, it was Supreme Court that have struck down the electoral bond scheme that was floated. And over here, the Supreme Court had declared that it is in the violation to the right of information, because this was not transparent. When the electoral bond scheme was introduced, it was not transparent, and ultimately it was in violation to the right of information, or right to information under Article 19(1)(a). That was the major reason why the Supreme Court struck down the electoral bond scheme. Now, this is the complete cycle that you can see, that there is the step one is that we have high cost of the modern campaigning. Then it leads to the dependency on the wealthy candidates, because we have seen that in the Indian members of parliament, 93% of them, they are millionaires. Then what happens is that there is a policy capture that is by the elites, and ultimately the concentration of the wealth and shrinking space for the grassroots leaders, that is the major ultimate that happens because of the plutocracy. All right, so this is the shift from one person, one vote to $1, one vote approach that we see in the case of plutocracy. All right, so again, this is very important piece of newspaper article when it comes to your UPSC preparation. All right. Now, the next is about the Supreme Court. The next news is about the Supreme Court, proceedings that is happening in the Sabarimala review judgment or review order that is going on. And over here, the Supreme Court had said that a person who wants to visit a temple has to follow the sampradaya of the shrine or stay out. So this answers your question. All right. So we had Ramu, you had asked this question just a few days before from me, right? You had asked that, sorry, there are certain people who are, they are not allowed to enter into the temple premises. All right. So that is what you have asked to me just a few days back. And I remembered while reading this article that the Supreme Court have just answered your question. Over here, Supreme Court have said that a person who wants to visit a temple has to follow the sampradaya or the traditional practices of the shrine, or they may stay out. All right, the court was making this reference when the Sabarimala review case that is ongoing in the Supreme Court right now. All right, and they cannot change the practice. That was what it was held. Like, for example, it was said that in Kerala, in some temples, you have to wear dhoti. If you cannot do it, you cannot enter there. There is no choice except to go under this sampradaya attached to the temple or a denomination. The moment you question the practice, you go out of the denomination. And that was what it was said in the Supreme Court. So again, this is very, very important to note over here. Again, a very important piece of news article and judgment by Supreme Court as well, because over here the Supreme Court had observed clearly that the devotee or a person must adhere to the shrine sampradaya. What is sampradaya? It is a tradition, or he may stay out. At the same time, the bench referred to dress codes as well as denominational customs which are there in temples and gurudwaras. At the same time, when it comes to Sabarimala, over here court has also remarked that when it comes to denying the entry to the women, that was actually not in the sampradaya. Alright, that was not in the sampradaya, and therefore when it comes to the Sabarimala reference, they have said that when the Supreme Court have stuck the 2018 verdict and it has allowed the entry of the women to the who are aged between 10 to 50 to the Ayyappa temple in Sabarimala, so that was actually, it is not a sampradaya, or it was not a custom or a tradition of the temple. At the same time, over here I have told you before as well that it is very important to note that over here the friction that is there is between Article 25 and Article 26. Article 25 protects the freedom of conscience as well as the religion. Alright, so it is the individual freedom of religion that is granted by Article 25. But Article 26 protects the denominational rights to manage the religious affairs. Any of the religious affairs can be managed by that religious community. Now over here the core issue is whether the individual choice can override the denominational practices, and over the judgment or the what has happened in the Supreme Court yesterday, it is a possible guidance for the future disputes on entry, dress code as well as customs that are followed by the various denominations which are there. At the same time, it is important to note there that there is a balance which is required, or the balance which is needed when it comes to reform, equality and even the freedom of religion. And this is also very relevant for the ethics as well, because the reforms, they must be, when it comes to the reforms, they must be lawful and inclusive as well. Now this complete thing, or the complete the proceedings which are happening in the Supreme Court, they also put forward a very important debate in the mind, and that is about constitutional morality and the religious autonomy. That is whether we must go for the constitutional morality or the religious autonomy. That is again a very important thing that will be, on which the Supreme Court may give out a verdict very soon. So it is about the essential religious practices that the Supreme Court is currently, it is reviewing the judgment of the Sabarimala case. And over here the major thing is about a division between individual right that is granted by Article 14, the right to equality, and even by Article 25, which provides for individual freedom of conscience. At the same time, when it comes to the denominational right, Article 26 provides for the freedom to manage the religious affairs as well as the ancient customs had been, or the traditions could be preserved by using Article 26, and that is the rift between the review judgment or the review proceedings that is going on right now. Now moving forward to the another piece of important news, and that is what does Jan Vishwas Bill do? Again, I have already told you about the Jan Vishwas Bill in detail. If you want to read this newspaper article, it is very important. It says that what it does or what is being introduced, how this bill promote efficient justice. But in short, actually I have told you yesterday as well, and in a complete series of the video, there is a complete video that you can see on in the video section, that the Jan Vishwas 2.0 bill is basically, it promotes the ease of doing business and ease of living in India. So it had been introduced, and this bill, it has amended total 784 provisions which are across 79 of the central acts. And historically we have seen that in India we had the punitive regulatory framework that had penalized lots of minor lapses which were there, and ultimately there was jail time. And because of the punitive action, because of the criminal action, what has happened is that it had clogged our judiciary system. There are total 4.8 crore of the pending cases which are there with the judiciary. But at the same time, by introducing the Jan Vishwas 2.0 bill, there are certain concerns about the risk of the excessive administration or the administrative discretion, and also about the weak appellate safeguards that will be there. So these are the two important concerns. So whenever you are writing any answer All right, whenever you are writing any answer, it is very important that you must balance your approach. Even if you are writing anything, see, I tell you, if you want to score good marks in UPSC, it is very important that your answer is very much balanced. If you are writing something in favor, write certain concerns as well, and then balance it with a positive outlook. And that is how you draft your complete answers, and then you score good in your UPSC. Alright, so what has happened? There is a complete paradigm shift that you can see, that the old regime was punitive, where there was a criminal liability. Ultimately, because of the criminal liability, there were the cases that were for the minor offences as well, and that led to the judicial delays and also the harassment of the micro, small and medium enterprises. But now what has happened is that the entrepreneurial risk taking will increase, and there will be calibrated fines, and ultimately administrative actions will be there. Administrative punitive actions will be taken. There will be just fines for the minor offences that had been proposed. This is the new regime that is based upon the trust that is there. All right. Now, coming to the next piece of the news that is important again, I told you climate change reshaping disease pattern, straining health system, that has been said by the report. Now, when it comes to the report, this is the report under the weather, India's climate health intersection pathways to resilience. This report was published by DASRA. Alright, DASRA is a philanthropy fund organization, and it has highlighted how the rising of the temperatures, erratic rainfall, floods and cyclones, they are no longer isolated events but part of the continuous cycle of disruption affecting health, livelihood and access to care across the complete country. So again, this is very important piece of the report that you can see over here. According to this report, that is under the weather, India's climate health intersections and pathways to resilience. I told you this was passed, or this was published by DASRA, and it says that 40%, nearly 40% of the India's district, they are at the high risk. They are at the high risk from the extreme weather. And the climate anomalies, whether it is the rainfall pattern, erratic rainfall, it is the high extreme events of the weather or the temperature, these anomalies are now no longer isolated, but now they are continuous cycle. They are shaping the disease patterns in India as well. The report says that when it comes to the losses, so there had been 160 billion labor hours that were lost in 2021. At the same time, when it comes to the disease patterns which had been linked with the climate change, so these disease patterns or the disease, this has a disproportionate burden on the rural and the informal workers and over women and infants as well. So this report says that this is the need of the hour, that we integrate health into our NAPCC, that is National Action Plan on the Climate Change. And also we must adapt our urban planning in the same way so that we can mitigate the risk of the climate change that we have right now in India. So this is again a very important piece of news that is there in the Hindu. And ultimately over here you can see that there are climate events like we have heat and the floods. And we have seen what has happened in the Himachal Pradesh. Alright, Himachal Pradesh. Alright, we have seen in the monsoon season that there were lots of floods that happened over there. Alright, so there is climate event, there is heat or the floods. Ultimately, there is vector proliferation and the heat stress as well. Alright, there are mosquito-borne diseases that increases, and total there were 160 billion loss of the labor hours, and the health system gets overloaded because of this climate change. Alright. Coming to the next piece of the news that is there, and this is in the editorial. This editorial had been written by Sangeeta Reddy, Joint Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals, and she says, Nari Shakti, India's defining reform for the next decade. Now again, when it comes to this editorial, it is very important piece of editorial because it says that we have shifted over the last decade when it comes to the policy. Alright, when it comes to the policy have completely shifted, and we are moving from intent to the infrastructure in the women's empowerment. And it says that we have lots of plans, lots of policies that have strengthened the role of women in the Indian economy. Whether it is the Ayushman Bharat, it is Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, or the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, or the 106th Constitutional Amendment Act. All right. So these are the certain of the schemes that have empowered the women in India, and ultimately now the women, they are just no longer, they are viewed as the welfare recipients, but they are contributing to the society and they are co-drivers of the macroeconomic growth. So this is how the women are contributing. The earlier phase was about the welfare and health, where we have focused upon Surakshit Maitritva. Then the next phase was upon the education of the female, and female literacy was the most important thing or aspect of the women empowerment in India. Then comes the phase 3, where we'll be seeing the political leadership, where the women have been economically uplifted. There were lots of bank accounts that were opened because of the various schemes that were introduced, and now the women have keen stake, or they are, when it comes to the loan distribution system, you will find that lots of women, they are taking loans, and not just for building houses. They are taking loans for the entrepreneur systems. They are moving into the entrepreneurship. And ultimately, that is a very, very important step that the country is taking. All right. And ultimately, the female labor force participation is increasing. We are to see the quota that has been introduced in the legislature in India. All right. We have 106th Amendment Act, or the Nari Shakti Vandan Adhiniyam, that had been introduced, and now it will be amended as well. So ultimately, we'll see the workforce or the participation of the female in the political leadership as well. That will increase, and ultimately that will result to the accelerated GDP growth in India as well. Again, a very good piece of editorial that you may read in today's The Hindu. The next is Iran ceasefire teeters over disputes on Lebanon Hormuz ahead of Pakistan talks. The Pakistan talks will be conducted from today onwards. Today is 10th of April, and again it is very important day when the talks will start in Islamabad. At the same time, related to the West Asian conflict that is going on, this is another piece of the news that is there in The Hindu, and it says US-Iran truce is on a shaky ground. That is, the truce is quite fragile. Again, the next article is about the Israel strike in the Lebanon that has sparked the condemnation from the rights body, that is basically the Red Cross Society. And then another piece of news that relates to this Iran conflict is that the US military to stay deployed near Iran. So now when it comes to these news, these 4 news are basically related to the US, Israel and Iran war that had been going on in the West Asia, and ultimately a ceasefire had been brokered between US and Iran, although Israel is not part of the ceasefire deal. Now when it comes to the tentative Israel and Iran ceasefire, they have faced the fresh strain after the strikes that have been happened in Lebanon. Just within 10 minutes, there were 100 of the bombs that were dropped. And ultimately, the Strait of Hormuz, it has remained a pressure point for the energy and the shipping as well. There are reports that Iran had mined the Strait of Hormuz. All right. There are reports that the Strait of Hormuz has already been mined. The negotiators were due to meet, and they are meeting in Pakistan amid the continued signaling from both the sides. Both the sides are still giving the threats to each other, and ultimately the Lebanon is part of the wider regional proxy theater when it comes to the Middle East or the West Asia. At the same time, the ceasefire in such conflicts, they are fragile when the core disputes, they remain unresolved. And as we can see, the core dispute, whether it is about the nuclear enrichment, whether it is about the control of the Strait of Hormuz, that remains unresolved between US and Iran. So over here, like I have told you, that the Iran's 10-point plan, it has included nuclear enrichment and also Lebanon ceasefire. And ultimately, Lebanon had been attacked by the Israel. At the same time, when it comes to the IRGC, it had been reported that they have mined the Strait of Hormuz. So we may have to see how the things will unfold starting from today. All right. At the same time, when it comes to the ceasefire, it is quite fragile. It is quite fragile because when it comes to US and Iran dispute, there is the dispute of Lebanon's inclusion. Because we have seen yesterday Iran have said that there is attack on the Lebanon, and ultimately Iran has threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz again. At the same time, US have said that when it comes to the ceasefire, we have not agreed with the ceasefire or over the Lebanon. All right, and Lebanon and Israel, that is a separate matter from what the matter is between US and Iran. So US has indirectly, it has denied interfering with the Israel and Lebanon. All right, so that is what we have seen yesterday. At the same time, the Iran has retained the dominion over the Hormuz, and it is not fully reopened yet. Iran has said that if any ship has to pass from the Strait of Hormuz, they must coordinate with the IRGC because the region had been mined. So there are safety concerns for the passage of the ships when it comes to Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, Israel is not party to the deal. That is very, very important. And Netanyahu over here had rejected the Lebanon ceasefire as well. Iran's uranium enrichment, right, is where the US red line is there, and US wants that there should be no enrichment of the uranium when it comes to Iran, and the mines are still in the Hormuz water. Shipping companies are hesitant to move forward in the Strait of Hormuz right now. Now, ultimately, when it comes to the global implication, there had been oil price surge that will lead to global inflation, and this is where central banks are in dilemma. At the same time, IAEA says that any nuclear accident at the Bushehr will be catastrophic. This is where we have the nuclear facility that is located. At the same time, the US military stays near the Iran until a real agreement is signed. Now, over here, what important is to note that over here, Trump has said that real agreement. Now, what this real agreement will be, we will see after the negotiations will be done in Pakistan, where Pakistan is acting as a mediator and it has boosted its diplomatic profile in the world as well. All right. Now, these are certain of the important choke points. These are primary choke points that you can see over here. Yes, Sukanya Samriddhi Yojana is also related to female empowerment. That's true. All right. So, over here, when it comes to these primary choke points, you can see that there is Panama Canal. Also, we have Oresun, we have Strait of Gibraltar, we have Suez Canal, we have Bab al-Mandeb, we have Strait of Hormuz and Strait of Malacca. So, these are the primary choke points along with Cape of Good Hope that is located at the tip of the Africa. Along with this, we have secondary choke points as well, but these are the primary choke points through which majority of the world trade happens. These are the most important shipping lanes which are there in the world. Now, when it comes to the India, you can see, when it comes to the India, we have the diplomats in the Tehran, Beirut and Tel Aviv. They are working round the clock. At the same time, there will be higher LPG or the fuel cost because of this. If there will be disruptions to the supply to the oil and the LNG, and ultimately there would be food inflation, and over here RBI is in dilemma, and that is why RBI took a neutral stance when it comes to the monetary review. And RBI have kept the repo rate at 5.25% itself. At the same time, I have said that in the Monetary Policy Committee, RBI have adopted wait and watch stance where the repo rate is unchanged at 5.25%. It has given a forecast of the inflation to 4.6% for the fiscal year 2027. At the same time, the exports to Gulf, they are likely to be constricted, or they are likely to decline, and ultimately the remittances from the Gulf nation, they may also slow down. There is fiscal deficit pressure as well, because if the fuel subsidies, they will increase, so that will lead to the fiscal deficit that will increase as well. Alright, so because the government spending will increase because of the subsidies. So ultimately there will be more of fiscal deficit if the subsidies will increase on the oil and the LNG or the LPGs. Alright. Now coming to the next piece of news that is there, the news article, it is about how will Gaganyaan astronauts, they will return safely to the Earth. It is about the safe landing, and it says that the Gaganyaan crew module, which will host the Indian astronauts on their human spaceflight mission that will orbit the Earth at the speed of 7,800 meters per second. So ultimately, when it enters the atmosphere, it will have to shed that kinetic energy. It will have to slow down. maximum of the or the primary brake that will be there, it will be the the atmosphere that is there, and there will be aero braking. So this it is a complete article about how the Gaganyaan entry will be there when it enters back to the atmosphere, and it says that the orbital speed of the Gaganyaan when it will be there in the orbit will be about 7,800 meter per second, and it will have to shed its energy via aerobraking. What is aerobraking? When it enters the atmosphere, there will be a friction from the atmosphere, and that will reduce the speed of Gaganyaan. Then there will be first step, that will be atmospheric drag, that will be primary brake, and within 12 kilometers of altitude, there will be complete drag that will be there. Alright, because of the atmosphere. Then in the second stage, or the second step, there will be multi-stage parachute systems that will be deployed to decrease the velocity of the Gaganyaan. Then in the step 3, there would be braking motors. They will fire before the touchdown, and the speed will reduce to 1 to 2 meter per second. And then there will be sea landing tolerance. That is where it will splash into the Bay of Bengal. When it comes to Gaganyaan, it will have a landing into the Bay of Bengal, and there will be an elliptical way where this will, or the elliptical region where this will fall, and over there the sea has a tolerance of 9 meter per second, because water, it is natural energy absorber. Alright, it absorbs the energy, so it has more of absorption power as compared to the land. So therefore Bay of Bengal had been chosen for the splashing of the Gaganyaan after its entry into India. Alright, now on the basis of this, you can find one of the again important question over here that says, with reference to the Gaganyaan mission's crew module recovery, consider following. We have the module will splash down in the Bay of Bengal. The landing zone is circular, bullseye due to precise trajectory control, and then the module is painted international orange for visibility. Indian Navy will lead the recovery operation. So which one is correct? Out of this, which one is correct? You have to tell. Alright, so as I have said, it will not be a bullseye. Alright, it will not be a bullseye, because when it comes to bullseye, even when it comes to USA, they cannot have a bullseye trajectory. Or it cannot, you cannot pinpoint where the module will re-enter and it will splash down. So when it comes to bullseye, it is not circular, but it will be elliptical. It is elliptical because we do not know where it will come and it will splash down. So it is not a bullseye. There is no precise trajectory control that will be there. So ultimately second is incorrect, but the rest are true. The module will splash down in the Bay of Bengal. The module is painted international orange for its visibility, and also the Indian Navy will lead the recovery operation. So it is 1, 3 and 4, that is A. A will be the correct answer. Alright, it will not be a circular, please remember. Alright, at the same time, there is also one more important piece of the news, that is that the government have notified CAPF law. Families protest, say it undermines the rights of the force. Again, it is very important, and I have to tell you, let me tell you that at StudyIQ, we are also launching the CAPF batches as well. So we know that most of you, while preparing for the civil services, you also go for CDS and CAPF. So very soon, we'll be launching the CDS and CAPF courses as well on StudyIQ platform. So stay tuned. We will have the complete courses. At the same time, when it comes to this news, this is very important. This is very important from the public administrative purposes as well. Alright, when it comes to, if you have optional, if you have chosen optional as public administration, again this news is very, very important. Alright, over here we know that the Parliament has passed the CAPF Bill 2026 on 2nd of April, and the President has already assented to it on 10th of April. Now this creates a unified legal framework for all the CAPF, that is BSF, we have CRPF, CIS, ITBP as well as Seema Suraksha Bal or SSB as well. It replaces the separate service rule regimes across all the forces, all the Central Armed Police Forces, and it says that the 50% of the IG post, 67%, more than 67% of the ADG post, all special DG post and the DG post, they will be by the IPS deputation. The IPS or the Indian Police Services deputation, they will be filled by the IPS deputation. Until now, such postings were only through the executive orders, but now they will be statutory and by law. Now, why this is important? This piece of law or the act is important because Supreme Court on May 23rd, 2025, it has asked the Ministry of Home Affairs to progressively reduce the IPS deputation in the CAPF up to IG level in the next 2 years. So now over here, the new act, it negates this Supreme Court order, and ultimately this is a constitutional conflict where the conflict is between the judiciary and the executive. At the same time, the CAPF families, they have protested at the Rajghat and demanded that old pension schemes to be introduced in the CAPF and there should be timely promotions. And at the same time, Rahul Gandhi, who is the leader of opposition in Lok Sabha, he have said that this is what a discriminatory system is, where the IPS are deputed and ultimately the forces, the CAPF forces, they should be led from within itself and the higher promotion should be available for the people who are from the CAPF forces. Now over here, it is very important to note Article 309 that says the Parliament can regulate the service conditions, and also we have Article 32 and Article 136 that provides for the Supreme Court supervisory jurisdiction as well. Over here, Article 32, it is from where we have different writs that could be filed, and at the same time, we have Article 136 that is for the special leave petition that is there. Alright, we have 5 different kind of writs. Alright, which all? We have habeas corpus, we have mandamus, we have certiorari, and also we have prohibition, and one more, that is quo warranto. So these are the 5 important writs or the 5 writs which are or which can be issued by the Supreme Court under Article 32. At the same time, the same writs, these 5 writs can be introduced or they could be directed by the High Court as well. But for the High Court, we have Article 226 that is there in the Constitution of India. At the same time, when it comes to IPS, the IPS is, or the Indian Police Service is the All India Service that is under or that was constituted under Article 312 that provides for All India services, and the deputation to the CAPF is the established practice. It is not given anywhere, but now this would be a statutory. There is now a complete law that have been framed for their deputation. Over here, it is very important to note that when it comes to CRPF, CRPF, there is Valour Day. The Valour Day was on, or it was on the April 9th. This is when the CRPF had their first paramilitary action, and it was in Gujarat. Alright, in 1965 war at the Sardar post in Gujarat, what happened was that there was Pakistani infiltration. There was a Pakistani infantry that attacked on the post and they managed to defeat them successfully. So that is why on this day, on 9th of April, there is Valour Day of the CRPF that is observed. Alright, at the same time, when it comes to CAPF, there are more than 2,700 security personnel from the CAPF that have been killed in anti-Maoist operations since 2001. And itself in the Chhattisgarh itself, there are about 1,318 of the CAPF personnel who have laid their lives. Alright, so again, CAPF are very important line of defense when it comes to the India as a country. Alright, over here we have the question. Which of the following is correct regarding the CAPF Journal Administration Act of 2026? The first one is it mandates all DG posts in CAPF must be filled by IPS officers on deputation. The act directly contradicts with the Supreme Court May 2025 direction to progressively reduce IPS deputation in CAPF. The act replaces the existing separate service rules for individual CAPF with a unified framework. So what will be the right answer? Yes, that's correct, Ramu. The High Court scope of issuing writs within the Article 226 is wider as compared to Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court can issue writs only in the case of the violation of the fundamental rights. But the High Court can issue the writs in the case of violation of the legal rights, in case of violation of fundamental rights and also the constitutional rights as well. Alright, so now when it comes to this question, what will be the right answer? Yes, it mandates all the special DG and the DG post all should be filled by the IPS officers on deputation. The Act directly contradicts with the Supreme Court judgment or the verdict. The Act replaces the existing separate service rules for the individual CAPF. So all are true and ultimately answer will be 1, 2 and 3. That will be the correct answer. Over here, on the basis of the news articles that we have studied or we have gone through in today's edition, you can see that these are the probable questions that could be asked in your mains examination. The first one is CAPF General Administration Act 2026 has been seen as contradicting a Supreme Court direction on IPS deputation in Central Armed Police Forces. Critically examine the constitutional implication of such legislative action and its impact on the morale and the career progression of the CAPF personnel. Second, the Criminalization of Minor Procedural Lapses Act acts as an anathema to ease of doing business in India. Discuss this in context to or in context of the Jan Vishwas Bill and evaluate concerns over administrative discretion. And then evaluate the ethical implications of plutocratic electoral system on grassroots democracy and equitable policy making. Alright. Now, in a summary, I would like to tell that when it comes to the global geopolitical headwinds, alright, if we want to increase the GDP, of the nation, we must be aware of the various geopolitical tensions which are going on and its impact on the Indian society. So we all know about the West Asian crisis that we have in front of us, the supply crunch that we have in terms of the oil import, and at the same time, what we must do for increasing the GDP, we must look forward for the demographic dividend where the women had been empowered and they can be a driving force for the GDP of the nation. At the same time, we must also focus upon simplifying the domestic regulations so that ease of doing business can be there in India, and ultimately we must also be resilient with the climate shocks that will be there, and through this we'll be able to build India into a wonderful and stronger India in the nearby future. So that is in the gist of all the things that we have studied in today's session. By mistake, come here thinking Soumya ma'am still teaches here. Okay. Alright, so ultimately over here, this is my QR code that you can scan and you can move to my Telegram where I will share all the PDF. You will get the annotated PDFs just right after the class. Alright, I'll be sharing this PDF with you all guys so that you can revise and you can note down the important points that we have discussed in today's session. And if you want to prepare for the civil services for 2027, for 2028, we have the foundation batch, that is the resolution batch. This is for English, this is for Hindi, this is for bilingual format as well. So you can enroll into the foundation batch, and for this you can use my code, that is BRS Live, for the maximum discount that you will get on these courses. Alright, so that would be all. Thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Jai Hind. Thank you for joining me over here. And again, I will just ask you to like the session. Just like the session if you have been with me throughout the session, as well as share the session with your friends over the various social media that you have, and also subscribe to our channel so that you do not miss any of the Hindu Live sessions with me in the future. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ramu. Thank you, Yuva. And thank you, Shinobi. Zenith, thank you very much. Yes, see you soon. Night tomorrow again at 9:30 a.m. Bye-bye everyone. Thank you. Jai Hind, and we'll meet again tomorrow at the same time. That is